A new NBA season is right around the corner, and Markelle Fultz is still a free agent. It was kind of starting to look like Markelle Fultz might be able to find his footing in Orlando, but they're yet to re-sign him, and as we get closer and closer to the start of a new NBA season, it's starting to make me wonder if any team is going to take a chance on the former #1 overall pick. So why is Markelle Fultz still unsigned? This video is brought to you by Squarespace, but a little bit more about them later. I think there's actually a lot of reasons why teams are pretty reluctant to take a swing on him, even though he was the former #1 overall pick in 2017. But we're going to get into how his career has kind of progressed since he left Philadelphia and went to Orlando. As always, if you enjoy the video or find it informative, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Helps out the channel a ton. All that out of the way, let's get into it. I want to preface this video by saying I've really been rooting for Markelle Fultz to be able to find a place in this league, even if he doesn't live up to the star potential that he had as the #1 overall pick. Ultimately, I just want to see him be a productive NBA player and have success. Anything I say in this video is not meant as a diss towards him. I'm just trying to take an objective look to see if there's a place for him still in the NBA, or if the league's kind of passed him by at this point. Fultz was an awesome college prospect, and if you go back and watch him in college, it looks like a completely different player. I don't think there were a ton of concerns about whether or not Markelle Fultz was going to be able to translate to the NBA. It's interesting because we associate Markelle Fultz with not being able to shoot, because that's been the big struggle for him throughout his career, but that just wasn't the case in college. Now, for those who weren't familiar with what Markelle was doing in college, he was a 41% three-point shooter on 5 attempts per game. It's not like there wasn't enough sample size to make an educated guess that, okay, he was able to shoot in college, he'll be able to shoot in the NBA. The loss of his jump shot was originally thought to be the result of a scapular muscle imbalance. The diagnosis for his injury was later changed to thoracic outlet syndrome, which Fultz described in his own words that it didn't allow me to go through the certain paths that I needed to shoot the ball. Unsurprisingly, it's pretty tough to stick in the NBA, especially today, if you're not able to shoot threes. And even though there's been flashes here and there throughout the past 5 years or so that there might be a shot still in there somewhere, it's just never been consistent enough or utilized for an extended period of time to where you could have any confidence that, you know, maybe this will be something he can do again. Now, he did start taking more threes with Orlando, but the shot never really started falling again. The best he got was during the 2022-23 season, where he shot 31% on 1.5 attempts per game, which obviously is an improvement over his career 27.4% three-point efficiency, but it's just not good enough, especially for the type of player that Markelle Fultz is. One of the biggest factors that's been working against Markelle, particularly this offseason and specific to the Magic, is that Orlando just doesn't have the minutes to spare for a player like him. The majority of Orlando's core pieces are under the age of 25. They're better served at this point trying to develop and integrate their own draft picks to try and get as much out of them as they can. They don't really have the developmental reps and minutes available to be trying to pull off this reclamation project with Fultz. It's just not realistic. Now, it is possible that if you put him in a situation where a team could devote more developmental time towards him, you might be able to get him to a point where he more closely resembles what people thought he was going to become as a player. But I'll be completely honest, even that seems unlikely at this point. He still gets talked about as if he's a young player, but he's 26 years old and he's going on his 8th season in the NBA, so that's not really accurate anymore. For the Magic, it gets even more difficult to justify bringing Markelle Fultz back when you look at their three-point shooting struggles last year. It paints a picture that Fultz is probably the last guy that you want on the floor. Orlando had the 4th lowest three-point attempt rate in the NBA last season, an issue that was only worsened by the fact that they were also the 6th lowest in three-point field goal percentage. It's pretty simple when you look at it like this. Orlando wasn't taking enough threes, and the threes that they were taking, they were not making at even a league average efficiency. So the solution is pretty simple. Get shooters that are willing to take the shots and can make them at a decent rate. The key to building around Paolo Banchero is surrounding him with shooters so that when teams double him, which happens pretty much all the time whenever he has the ball and gets inside the arc, he's able to spray it out to shooters waiting for him on the perimeter. But it's not just about giving Paolo passing options that can knock down shots off of his gravity. It's also about opening things up for Paolo himself so that he has an easier time of scoring. He was getting constantly double teamed last year because opposing defenses knew that, okay, we can just help off of these guys who are non-shooters on the floor, and we really only have to worry about Paolo being the one that can make us pay. Even if Paolo kicks it to one of them, either A, they weren't going to take the three in the first place, or B, they're not going to make the three at a decent enough of a clip that it's going to actually hurt you. This makes Paolo's life significantly more difficult as a scorer, and it just makes the offense as a whole struggle, because you're not getting the most out of the scoring gravity that Paolo has. So you have to build that team with plenty of viable three-point shooters, and unfortunately that's just not Markelle Fultz. So this kind of leaves us with the question of, is there any team that would sign him at this point? And before we answer that question, I want to take just a second to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website building platform for creators to set themselves apart from the crowd online. Whether you're trying to share your work with more people or grow a brand, Squarespace makes it super simple to build an awesome website where you can engage with your audience and reach more people. I have zero web design experience, but Squarespace's simple user interface takes all of the frustrating parts about building a website and it turns it into an easy and fun process. You can make a completely personalized website with their guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. You can choose from professionally curated layout and styling options to build a unique website from the ground up, and they make it super easy to manage your search engine optimization so that you can find your audience and they can find you. Make checkout effortless for your customers with simple yet powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with ClearPay and Afterpay. If you've always wanted to build a website but you just don't know where to start, then Squarespace should be your first step. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AlexHoops for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to it. One of the issues with talking about a team potentially signing Markelle Fultz is that the Magic aren't unique in the sense that they're built around Paolo in a way where you need to surround him with shooters. That's how most teams are built in the NBA today. So when talking about a team that would potentially be interested in Markelle Fultz, the big hangup is the fact that he's not really going to be able to be a floor spacer. And this is more of a problem for him because he's a guard as opposed to a wing or a big man. I'm not sure there's really a compelling case that you could make right now for a team to be really interested in signing him. One of Markelle's qualities that I became really intrigued with during the 2022-23 season was his mid-range shooting. He shot 48% on floater range shots and 44% on long mid-range shots. And I thought, all right, Markelle's not going to shoot threes. That might be okay if you can get him to leverage that mid-range scoring and that becomes a consistent part of his offensive bag. This will be how he can leverage his scoring in other ways outside of perimeter shooting. But aside from this 2022-23 season, his mid-range scoring has only ever been below league average, both before and after. It kind of seems like this 2023 shooting efficiency that he had in the mid-range was more of a flash in the pan and not necessarily a consistent thing that he would be able to do. He showed a lot of stuff during the 2023 season as a driver and finisher that made you a little more optimistic. But again, this is a situation where he did it well in one season, but that hasn't carried over after that. One of the big problems is that during his time in Orlando, he shifted from more of an on-ball role to having to assimilate into an off-ball role. And that's really difficult to do when, one, you're more of an on-ball player as it is. That's the player that you've had to be for most of your career. And then two, he doesn't really shoot, and it's tough to be an effective off-ball player if you're not willing to shoot. This applies mostly to guards, not necessarily to power forwards and centers, but to be an effective off-ball player, you need to be willing to shoot it because, for example, with Paolo, if Paolo gets doubled and he kicks it to Markelle, a defense right now is going to see Markelle Fultz get the ball, and they're not going to worry about him shooting a three at all. One, because they know he's probably not even going to take it in the first place, and two, they know he's probably not going to make it. It's difficult to imagine what Markelle could do offensively as an off-ball player, aside from attacking off the catch or being a more active off-ball cutter. Now, the one thing that I think teams can still benefit from by signing Markelle is his passing ability. And I'm intentionally saying passing ability instead of playmaking ability. And that's because the scoring is in such a bad place that I'm not sure that passing really turns into playmaking ability because that scoring isn't being leveraged to manipulate defenses. You need to be an effective scorer in order to be a quality playmaker, and there are very few exceptions to that. Opposing defenses know that Fultz isn't going to be looking to score the basketball, so he's not really able to manipulate them with the threat of his scoring. So you don't really get the full benefits of his talent as a passer. The biggest problem with Fultz at this point is that everything is becoming theoretical. if he can start hitting his threes, if he can stay healthy, if he can play effectively off ball, if his mid-range shooting becomes a weapon. These are all really big questions that are difficult to be optimistic about. When it comes to a player that's fresh out of college and new to the NBA, if you're an NBA team, you're willing to take a chance and gamble on these theoreticals. But Markelle Fultz is 26. He's essentially in his prime or entering his prime years, and there's not a ton of evidence that he's going to get much better than he is right now. And again, none of this is meant as a dig on Markelle Fultz. I'm extremely bummed that that injury in Philly did as much damage as it did, and he hasn't been able to get his confidence back from there. But I think we're past the point where teams are going to look at him and see oh, he was a former #1 overall pick back in 2017. What if we sign him on a minimum and he ends up turning into the star that we thought he was going to be? That might work like 4 or 5 years after a player was drafted, but we're going on his 8th season. I don't think it's going to happen at this point. Now, does this mean that he should still be unsigned? Does that mean that he shouldn't get a contract at all? No, not necessarily. And he's probably better than a lot of players that are sitting on benches in the NBA right now. I would be surprised if a team didn't try to sign him at some point, but I don't think there should be high expectations at this point about the kind of contributions you're going to get from him. It's also worth mentioning that he's consistently struggled with injuries throughout the last 4 or 5 years. He played 43 games last year, 60 games the year prior, 18 games the year before, 8 games the year before that. His healthiest season was back in 2020, but since then he hasn't really been able to stay on the floor. It's just disappointing because Fultz could have been so good. The player that we see now is just drastically different than the player that we saw in college. And nothing would make me happier than for Fultz to come back this season, get on a contract with a team, and prove everybody wrong. But I think you can only hold your breath for that for so long. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more stuff like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps out the channel a ton. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.